For 10 years, I sacrificed my career to care for my dying father and his beloved home. The day after his funeral, my mother and brother changed the locks. "The house is his now," she said coldly. They thought I was broken. They had no idea I held the one secret that would cost them everything. There's a specific scent that will forever define the first chapter of my life. The sweet, almost peppery fragrance of the peace roses my father planted, mingled with the damp, rich smell of soil after a morning rain. For 10 years, that scent was my world. It was the air I breathed, the perfume on my clothes, the essence of a love so profound it had its own geography, all contained within the wrought iron gates of our family home. I had been 25 when I made the choice. My acceptance letter to one of the country's top landscape architecture programs was sitting on my desk, a shimmering portal to a life I had dreamed of. It promised bustling city streets, challenging projects, a name for myself. But in the room next door, my father, Richard, had just received his own letter in the form of a doctor's diagnosis: early-onset Parkinson's. The shimmering portal suddenly felt like a flight from duty, a betrayal. So I stayed. I told everyone I stayed for him, and that was the truest thing in the world. But a secret, shameful part of me, the part that whispered in my ear late at night, knew I also stayed for myself. The world outside, the one of competition and ruthless ambition, felt vast and terrifying. I feared I would fail, that I wasn't as brilliant as that acceptance letter suggested. The garden, the house, the routine of care, it was a beautiful, manageable cage where I knew my purpose. It was a noble sacrifice that conveniently doubled as a shield for my fear. My mother, Eleanor, never understood my connection to the earth. She appreciated the garden the way one appreciates a fine painting, as a backdrop for social events, a testament to the family's good taste. She herself had not come from money, a fact she worked tirelessly to erase with every new pearl necklace, every perfectly hosted charity luncheon. She had married my father and ascended into a world she now guarded with the ferocity of a dragon. In her eyes, there were two kinds of people: those who created status and those who served it. My brother, Leo, was her designated creator. 2 years my junior, he possessed a smooth, easy charm that could fill a room and an impressive resume of consulting jobs that my father's money quietly funded. I was the server. I remember one particular afternoon in late summer. I had spent a week fighting off a nasty bout of black spot that threatened to decimate Dad's prized hybrid teas. My hands were stained with fungicide and my back ached, but the roses were saved. That evening, Eleanor was hosting her garden club. As she led a group of women in crisp linen dresses through the yard, Leo breezed in, late as usual, wearing a new suit. "Save the day, did you, Clara?" he'd said with a wink, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing tray. My mother overheard. "Oh, Leo, you're here!" she exclaimed, her voice bright and brittle. She turned to her friends. "Leo has his father's mind for business. He's just landed a massive new client." She beamed while I stood there in my dirt-smudged jeans. To one of her friends, a woman named Cynthia, she added in a confidential whisper I was clearly meant to hear, "Clara, well, she has a good heart for simple things." Simple things, like coaxing life from the soil, like knowing the precise moment to feed or to prune, like holding my father's shaking hand to help him drink a glass of water. To my mother, these were menial tasks. To Leo, they were my designated duties, freeing him up for more important matters. Later that evening, he cornered me in the kitchen, complaining that his car was making a funny noise. "Could you take a look tomorrow?" he'd asked, not as a request, but as an expectation. I've got back-to-back meetings. My father saw things differently. As his body weakened, his perception seemed to sharpen. He would sit in his wheelchair by the French doors, watching me work in the garden. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, he would share memories of planting each rosebush, his voice a soft, raspy whisper. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, when the sun slanted low through the windows, that he gripped my hand, his hold surprisingly firm. "Don't let them bulldoze my roses, Clara," he'd whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with a startling lucidity. Your real inheritance isn't something they can see. It's on my desk. Remember that. His desk was a heavy, antique oak piece in his study, a fortress of drawers and cubbies that he always kept locked. I patted his hand, murmuring that of course I wouldn't, dismissing his words as a moment of confusion. But they planted a seed of curiosity in my mind. The final year was a blur of increasing medication and decreasing clarity for my father. It was also a time of hushed whispers. Eleanor and Leo were more present than ever, having quiet meetings in the study with the door closed. They brought in a new lawyer, a slick young man with a blindingly white smile, to update some family documents. I found my mother in the hallway after one such meeting. "What's going on, Mom?" I thought Mr. Harrison handled all of Dad's affairs. She patted my arm, her touch light and dismissive. Her hand went to her pearl necklace, a nervous habit I'd come to recognize as a prelude to a lie. "Darling, after everything we've been through, do you not trust me? This is to make things simpler for everyone. You have enough to worry about." She was right about that. My world had shrunk to a 24-hour cycle of medications, meals, and care. I was too exhausted to argue, too consumed by the imminent grief to see the conspiracy tightening around me. The end came peacefully. My father passed away in his sleep, his hand in mine, as the first light of dawn touched the dew on the rose petals outside his window. The silence he left behind was immense, a deafening void. In the quiet emptiness of the house, I felt a terrifying sense of purposelessness wash over me. For 10 years, my title was caregiver. My identity was daughter who stayed home. Now I was just Clara. And standing there, alone in the silent house, I had no idea who that was anymore. The beautiful cage was empty, and I had forgotten how to fly. The funeral was a performance in which I had no speaking part. Eleanor, veiled and elegant, accepted condolences with a tragic grace. Leo, somber in a perfectly tailored suit, delivered a eulogy full of eloquent, hollow words about legacy and strength, words he had clearly not written himself. He spoke of my father's business acumen and his love for the finer things in life. He never once mentioned the roses. Distant relatives and my father's old friends approached me throughout the reception, their eyes soft with pity. "You were a saint, Clara," one aunt whispered, squeezing my hand. "Richard was so lucky to have you." Each compliment felt like a small, sharp pinprick against my mother's composure. I saw her jaw tighten every time someone acknowledged my sacrifice. She wanted the narrative to be about her grief, her loss, her strength in the face of tragedy. My decade of service was an inconvenient subplot. The performance ended the next morning. I woke up feeling hung over from grief, my body heavy and my mind numb. I walked downstairs, craving the simple ritual of making coffee, and found the front door ajar. A locksmith was just packing up his tools. The lock, the familiar brass fixture I had turned tens of thousands of times, was gone, replaced by a shiny, new, unfamiliar one. I stepped into the living room, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. Eleanor and Leo were waiting for me. They were sitting on the formal sofa, the one reserved for guests, and they looked at me as if I were one. "Clara, we need to discuss your living arrangements," Eleanor said. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. She adjusted her pearls. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "This is my home." "It was Dad's home," Leo corrected me, leaning forward. He had a file folder in his hand, and he tapped it with an air of finality. "And he left it to me. The will was updated last month. It's all very clear." The air left my lungs. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself, the new lawyer's white smile flashing in my mind. "Updated? But Dad wasn't. He couldn't have understood. Your father," and I decided Leo needed the stability. Eleanor cut in, her voice sharp as glass. "He has a family to think of one day, a position to maintain. You're resourceful, Clara. You'll be fine." She stood up, her posture ramrod straight. "Your contributions were appreciated, but it's time you found your own way." My contributions. 10 years of my life, my youth, my dreams, reduced to a casual, dismissive acknowledgement. Leo opened the file and slid a check across the polished coffee table. It was made out to me for $5,000. "This is to help you get on your feet," he said, with the magnanimous air of a king bestowing a coin upon a peasant. Beside the check was a single, flattened cardboard box. My box. Inside, I could see the corner of my favorite book, a small framed photo of me and my dad, and a threadbare sweater. They had curated my life into a neat, disposable package. I need to pack my things," I stammered, my mind reeling. "We took the liberty," Eleanor said. "We didn't want to burden you. We need you to be out within the hour. The estate needs to be settled quickly." The cruelty was so breathtaking, so absolute, it felt unreal. I looked from my mother's cold, impassive face to my brother's smug, triumphant one. There was no recourse, no appeal. I had been tried, judged, and exiled from my own life, all before I'd had my morning coffee. The paper check felt like an invoice from my own heart. 10 years, valued at $5,000. I walked out of that house without another word, carrying my single box of memories. I didn't cry. I was too far gone for tears. I was in shock, a ghost leaving the only place I had ever been truly solid. I ended up on the doorstep of my friend Maria's apartment. She took one look at my face, at the box in my arms, and pulled me inside without a word. Her small, cluttered apartment became my sanctuary. For 3 days, I existed in a fog. Maria would put food in front of me, and I would stare at it until it got cold. She would talk to me, and her voice would sound like it was coming from the other end of a long tunnel. The anger hadn't come yet. First came the shame. It was a thick, suffocating blanket. I replayed the last 10 years over and over, seeing not my love but my naivete. I saw every time I'd smoothed over Leo's transgressions, every time I'd accepted my mother's backhanded compliments as affection. Had I been a fool? Had I willingly placed my neck on the executioner's block, believing it was a pillow? One evening, unable to sleep, I mindlessly scrolled through Instagram. And there it was, a post from Leo. It was a photo of him and his girlfriend clinking champagne glasses in the rose garden. My rose garden. In the background, I could see weeds starting to creep into the flower beds. The caption read, "Carrying on the family legacy." The public lie of it all, the sheer audacity, finally pierced through my numbness. The shame curdled into a slow-burning rage. But the world seemed to conspire to smother that fire before it could truly catch. I started applying for jobs in landscape architecture, my old dream a faint, flickering hope. The response was always the same, a polite rejection. A 10-year gap on a resume is a chasm few employers are willing to cross. My $5,000 was disappearing at an alarming rate. Finally, defeated, I took the only job I could get. I was hired for a seasonal position at a big box store called Garden Depot. I spent my days in a scratchy orange apron, answering questions about fertilizer and hauling bags of mulch for people creating the very gardens I once dreamed of designing. The ultimate humiliation came a few weeks later. A woman in expensive athletic wear was complaining about her finicky orchids. I spent 10 minutes patiently explaining the importance of humidity and indirect light, drawing on years of knowledge. She looked at me, impressed. "Wow, you really know a lot," she said, her tone patronizingly bright. "Did you ever think of doing this professionally?" I just stood there, the plastic name tag reading Clara feeling like a brand on my skin. The question, meant as a compliment, landed like a punch. It was the perfect, brutal summary of my fall. I was a ghost haunting the edges of my own stolen life, and the world itself seemed to be telling me I was a failure. That was my rock bottom. The floor was hard, cold, and littered with the debris of my own broken illusions. The woman's patronizing question at Garden Depot became a strange sort of catalyst. For a full day, I stewed in the humiliation. But as I stood there under the fluorescent lights, surrounded by the chemical smell of pesticides and plastic pots, a different feeling began to surface through the shame, defiance. They had taken my home, my past, my father. They would not take my knowledge. That was mine. The next day, a different woman, Mrs. Davenport, came in, looking exasperated. She was a wealthy, elegant woman in her late 60s, and she threw a high-end gardening magazine down on the counter. None of my landscapers can make my garden look like this, she lamented. They charge a fortune to mow and blow, but they have no soul. My hydrangeas are a disaster. Something inside me clicked. I spent 20 minutes with her, sketching on a napkin, explaining how to alter the soil pH to get the deep blue bloom she wanted, talking about companion planting and seasonal interest. I wasn't just an employee. I was an expert again. She was stunned. "Young lady, you're in the wrong place," she said, her eyes sharp and assessing. She scribbled her number on a piece of paper. "I will pay you double what this place pays you for 1 hour of your time, just to come and look at my garden. Come this Saturday." That Saturday I went. Her estate was magnificent, but the gardens were, as she'd said, soulless. We walked for an hour, and I poured out everything I knew. At the end, she wrote me a check for $200. "This is the start," she said. "I want to hire you for a full redesign of my English garden. Draw up a proposal." I walked away from her house, feeling a spark I thought was long dead. It wasn't just the money. It was the respect. It was being seen for my skills, not my service. That night on Maria's couch, I didn't just cry. I got to work. I used Mrs. Davenport's check to order 100 professional business cards. They read, "Legacy Gardens, specializing in the restoration and care of sentimental landscapes." I spent hours online, devouring articles on small business finance and marketing. I practiced a sales pitch in the mirror, my voice shaking at first, then growing steady and confident. My business grew not by magic, but by grit. Mrs. Davenport was so thrilled with my proposal that she recommended me to 2 of her friends before I had even broken ground. I worked my shifts at Garden Depot, then spent my evenings and days off at my clients' homes, my hands once again deep in the soil. This time, however, it was on my terms. I poured the rage and the grief into the soil of other people's gardens, and slowly, something new began to grow. Within 3 months, I had enough clients to quit my job at the store. I was exhausted, constantly covered in dirt, but I was building something that was mine. It was during this time that I got the call. The name on the screen made my heart stop. Arthur Harrison, my father's old lawyer, the one my mother had pushed aside. He asked to meet for coffee. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. Mr. Harrison was in his 70s, with kind eyes clouded by a deep sadness. He got straight to the point. "Clara, I haven't been able to sleep well since Richard passed," he began, his voice raspy. "The will Eleanor filed, it didn't sit right with me. Your father was a sharp man, but he was weak and heavily medicated at the end. I suspected undue influence, but I had no proof." He sighed, stirring his coffee. "Legally, my hands were tied, but morally, that's a different matter." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, sealed box made of dark wood. "Richard gave this to me 5 years ago. He said it was for you, and that I should give it to you if you ever truly needed it. I think that time is now." He pushed the box across the table. "Your father knew his wife's ambition and his son's weakness," Mr. Harrison said gently. "He also knew your strength, Clara, even when you didn't." His words were the validation I had been starved of. I drove back to Maria's apartment and opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were old photos, my father's military dog tags, and a single, heavy, antique brass key. I knew it instantly. It was the key to his oak desk. The desk he told me to remember. The question was how to get to it. An idea began to form, a risky and terrifying one. I started following Leo's girlfriend on social media. A week later, she posted an invitation to a massive end-of-summer party at the house. My first thought was to sneak in, but the thought of skulking around my own home like a thief felt wrong. It felt like their narrative of me, not mine. I needed a better way. I thought of our old neighbor, Mrs. Gable. She had lived next door for 40 years and had often had tea with my father in the garden. She had also been one of the people who'd looked at me with the most profound sympathy at the funeral. I went to see her the day before the party. I told her everything. Her kind face hardened with an indignation that mirrored my own. "It's a disgrace, what they're doing," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The music is so loud, and that beautiful garden, it's a mess. Your father would be heartbroken." She disappeared into her house for a moment, and came back with a single key on a plain silver ring. He gave this to my husband years ago in case of an emergency. My Henry passed, but I kept it. She pressed the key into my hand. This is not for sneaking, Clara. This is for justice. Go find what your father left for you. The night of the party, I parked down the street. Music and loud laughter spilled out from the house, polluting the quiet suburban air. I waited until after midnight, when the party was at its loudest. With Mrs. Gable's key in my hand and her blessing in my heart, I walked not like a thief, but like a daughter coming home. I used the back gate, walked through the shadows of the neglected garden, and let myself in through the side door to the laundry room. The house was pulsating with a life that felt alien. I slipped up the back staircase to the second floor. The study was untouched, the one room they had no use for. The heavy oak desk stood there like a silent guardian. My heart pounded as I inserted the brass key. It turned smoothly. Inside, it was just as I remembered. Old pens, stationery, paper clips. My hope began to sink. Then I remember my father tapping the bottom of the main drawer once while looking for a stamp. My fingers traced the wood. I felt a small, almost invisible seam. I pressed, and a section of the floor of the drawer popped up. It was a false bottom. Underneath lay a thick, sealed manila envelope. My name was written on it in my father's familiar, shaky script. With trembling hands, I opened it. The first document was a legal paper, handwritten, a holographic will, dated 2 years prior, witnessed by Arthur Harrison and Henry Gable. It clearly and unequivocally left the house and a substantial maintenance trust to me, Clara Annabelle Miller. The second was a multi-page letter. As I read my father's words, the world fell away. He wrote of his love for me, his pride in my quiet strength. And he wrote of the pressure, the constant, draining emotional manipulation from Eleanor and Leo. How they had cornered him in his weakest, most medicated moments, pushing papers in front of him, telling him it was for the best, that Clara would be fine, that Leo needed the legacy. Forgive me for not being strong enough to stop them in person, he wrote at the end. They're my family, and I am a weak man, but I'm giving you the tools to fight. This house is your soul, Clara. It was never theirs to give away. Be the strong one now. Be the woman I always knew you were. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of sadness, but of vindication. I carefully placed the documents back in the envelope. Reading my father's words, I felt the last of the scared, self-doubting girl inside me die, and a woman made of grief and steel take her place. My inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a mission, and the battle was about to begin. The next morning, the world looked different. The sky was sharper, the air clearer. I drove not to a client's house, but to Mr. Harrison's office, the precious envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a holy relic. I handed it to him, and as he read the will and his old friend's letter, his sad eyes hardened into righteous anger. This is it, Clara, he said, his voice firm. This is probate fraud. It's a serious crime. We have them. He didn't suggest a dramatic confrontation. He suggested a surgical strike. He called my mother's lawyer and scheduled a meeting for the final settlement of the estate. 2 days later, I walked into the conference room of a downtown law firm. I was wearing a simple, tailored navy blue dress I had bought with money from my own business. My hands were clean, my nails were filed, but under them, I could still feel the phantom grit of good soil. It kept me grounded. Eleanor and Leo were already there, looking impatient and supremely confident. Leo gave me a dismissive nod. Eleanor didn't look at me at all. They thought I was there to sign away my final rights for a pittance. Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrison began, his tone formal. We have some newly discovered documents pertaining to the estate of Richard Miller, which we need to discuss. He slid 2 packets across the polished table. One for them, one for their lawyer. Each contained a perfect copy of the holographic will and our father's letter. I watched them. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times, fantasized about screaming, about making them feel a fraction of the pain they had caused me. But now, in the sterile quiet of the room, I felt a strange calm. The power had shifted. Leo's smug expression dissolved as he read. The color drained from his face, leaving it pasty and slack. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with panic. Eleanor read the letter with a rigid stillness, but I saw her hand, the one not holding the papers, tremble slightly. Her knuckles were white. Their lawyer, the slick young man with the bright smile, was no longer smiling. He read the documents quickly, his face growing paler with each page. He understood the legal jeopardy instantly. This is an outrage. Eleanor finally sputtered, her voice high and strained. This is a forgery. Clara was always manipulative. Eleanor, be quiet, her lawyer snapped, his voice a low, urgent command. He looked at Mr. Harrison. What is it you want? It's not what we want, it's what Richard wanted, Mr. Harrison said calmly. He laid out the terms. They were simple and brutal. They would sign a confession of acting under undue influence, invalidating the new will. They would cede the entire estate, including all assets, to Clara, as per the original will. They would vacate the house within 48 hours. And if we don't, Leo blustered, a pathetic attempt to regain control. If you don't, Mr. Harrison replied, his voice dropping to an icy calm, I will walk these documents over to the district attorney's office this afternoon. Probate fraud is a felony. And a letter like this, he tapped the copy of my father's words, is a reporter's dream. The scandal would ruin you. Is this house worth your reputation and your freedom? Checkmate. As the reality of her ruin settled upon her, I looked at my mother, and for a fleeting, gut-wrenching second, I saw past the pearls and the cruelty. I saw a scared, desperate woman whose entire identity was built on a foundation of wealth and status that was now crumbling beneath her. I saw the same terror of inadequacy that had once kept me a prisoner in that very house. I had expected to feel a surge of victory. Instead, I felt a profound, weary sadness. I wasn't destroying a monster. I was just ending a lie. They signed. 2 days later, I walked into my house. The silence was absolute. They had taken the expensive furniture, but they had left their chaos behind. There were scuff marks on the walls, wine stains on the carpets, and a layer of dust over everything. The house felt sick tired. The real shock came when I opened the mail. A pile of urgent, red-stamped letters from a bank. Leo, in his infinite business wisdom, had taken out a massive second mortgage on the house to fund a tech startup that had already failed. The final, selfish act of a spoiled child. The estate my father had left was substantial, but this new debt was a deep, unexpected wound. The battle was won, but the work was just beginning. I never heard from my mother again. She moved to a small condo in Florida, vanishing from the social circles she had fought so hard to conquer. Leo, I heard through the grapevine, was working a commission-only sales job in another state. The family legacy he was so desperate to carry now nothing but a mountain of debt. I didn't sell the house. I couldn't. It felt like abandoning my father all over again. Instead, I poured myself into its healing. I used the profits from legacy gardens and the trust my father had left to pay down the debt and begin the slow process of restoration. The work was my therapy. I scrubbed the floors, repainted the walls, and threw open the windows to let the fresh air chase out the ghosts of their greed. My most important work was in the garden. It was choked with weeds, the roses neglected and dying. I spent weeks on my hands and knees, pulling out the invasive growth, my muscles aching. Every weed I pulled was a resentment discarded. Every dead branch I pruned was a painful memory excised. I nurtured the soil, fed the roses, and slowly, painstakingly, brought them back to vibrant, fragrant life. I wasn't just restoring a garden, I was reclaiming my own roots. A year has passed. The house is once again filled with light and the scent of roses. This evening, the garden is full of laughter. My laughter. Maria is here, arguing with Mr. Harrison about the best way to stake tomatoes. Mrs. Gable is sipping iced tea, admiring the blooms. A few of my first clients, people who have become my true friends, are chatting by the fountain. This is my family now, one forged not by blood, but by loyalty, respect, and shared kindness. I look at my hands. The nails are short and clean, but there are calluses on my palms that will never leave. They're the hands of a business owner, a homeowner, a survivor. I finally understand what my father meant. My inheritance wasn't the house or the money. It was the strength I was forced to find inside myself when all of it was taken away. My mother and brother thought the house was the prize. They never understood. The prize was never the house. It was the woman I had to become to save it. I look out at the setting sun, its golden light bathing the garden I brought back from the brink, the garden that in turn brought me back. It makes me wonder. We all have a garden we are meant to tend to, a place of passion and potential. What have you been afraid to let grow?